Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. Today's tale is about small things that suddenly become everything. An old roof, a stubborn splinter, a joke that turns into a siren. The kind man who always steadied their days collapses while helping to dismantle the house, and Huyen now waits, heart hollowed, outside the emergency room. Will he wake up from that fall? How can a single act of kindness turn into the fiercest test of fate? What will Huyen choose? Cling to the past or build a future from the pieces? Watch until the end to find out what happens and the quiet lesson hidden in the dust. If this story touches you, please subscribe. Help the channel reach 1,000 followers so more stories like this can be told. The morning unfolded gently as Huyen greeted the world with a voice both steady and fragile. The garden lay in soft light, a corner waiting to be transformed. The old house pulled apart, its timbers prepared for new life as a chicken coop. Around her stood fragments of family and memory. Brother, with sleeves rolled high, ready to shoulder the weight of beams. Mom, already speaking of taro and sugar cane. Maya, a child's laughter lingering in the air. Bibi, restless, watching over the chickens. The task was simple in appearance, yet it pressed on Huyen's heart. The walls, though eaten by termites, whispered of years gone by. Every nail, every scar of wood recalled the day she first set foot here with Maya, alone but determined to carve out shelter. She remembered rain dripping through a leaking roof, brother climbing to mend it, nearly falling until fate steadied him. Those days had shaped her courage, teaching her that even decay could cradle resilience. Now, as the posts were marked for cutting, silence lingered in the pauses between the saw and the wind. Huyen's eyes drifted across the old boards. To dismantle was not just labor. It was erasing a shelter that had once been both womb and witness. She hesitated, hands trembling slightly, as if every strike of the hammer struck her chest. Brother's quiet presence beside her anchored her resolve. "We will reuse it," he said, lifting a beam softened by years. And in that simple promise, to turn loss into foundation, Huyen found a fragile thread of comfort. Yet beneath her calm, grief brewed, silent and heavy. They moved with the deliberate rhythm of people who had learned to make salvage into promise. Planks were eased loose, nails pried, and the air filled with the thin metallic cough of tools. Plans took shape in the small gestures. 4 posts to cut so the frame could be slid free. Slats set aside to become a fence. A section kept to become the coop's floor. Mom spoke of taro and sugar cane, already thinking of a simple meal to offer whoever came to help. Bibi darted between stacks of wood, an island of restless motion beneath the patient hush of dismantling. A sudden, sharper sound cut through the mechanical chorus. A cry, a startled breath. "A splinter pierced my hand," someone said, voice tight with surprise. Hands paused. Brother, the steady presence who had been lifting beams and teasing to keep spirits light, knelt fast and careful. "Let me take it out for you," he offered, calm as water. He worked the tiny shard free with slow, sure motions. Someone brought water, someone else a rag. "Sit down and rest a little," he urged, concern folding the teasing into care. The exchange was small, more balm than drama, but it revealed the architecture beneath their work. Care scaffolded by habit. Brother rubbed a palm over the wound, then offered a grin that tried to erase the tremor his hands could not hide. "I'll get you some water," he said, and set about fetching it, leaving the moment soft around them. Mom called for someone to watch the chickens. Maya's name fluttered through a conversation about school supplies. The salvaged wood lay in neat piles, each piece a quiet promise that nothing here would be wasted. In those small ministrations, a pulled splinter, an offered cup, the day's labor kept its human pulse. The work pressed on, each strike against the frame echoing in the quiet air. Brother dug around the base of a post, loosening earth so it might be lifted more easily. The wood groaned, aged and hollowed by termites, yet still stubborn. A gust of wind swept through the open clearing, rattling the roof like a breath held too long. Then it happened, a sudden crack, sharp as a whip. The beam shuddered, buckled, and the world folded in on itself. Dust rose, and in its midst, Brother fell. Silence swallowed the space, then shattered with a cry that tore from Huyen's throat. "Help me! Is there anyone there?" Her voice strained, desperate, as she knelt beside him, searching his face for signs of breath, of life. For an instant, the world seemed to tilt into ruin. She shook him, pleaded with him, her hands trembling against his chest. "Wake up! Why did you faint like that?" Every memory of this house, the leaking roof, the laughter beneath its rafters, the days when it sheltered her and Maya, collided with the terror of losing the man who had become its true foundation. At last, his eyelids fluttered. He whispered faintly, then, with a trace of mischief too fragile for the moment, admitted, "I was just teasing. I'm fine." Relief mixed with anger in Huyen's eyes, fury at his jest, relief that he breathed, grief at how close she had come to losing him. She pressed her palms into the soil, whispering a prayer against the still settling dust. Let this not be the beginning of goodbye. The dust of the collapse still clung to her memory as the sound of sirens carried them away. What had seemed a cruel jest moments earlier had unraveled into dread. Brother, the man whose hands had steadied beams and hearts alike, now lay on a stretcher. His breathing faltered. The strength that once lifted pillars had turned fragile, each breath a question without answer. Huyen found herself rooted outside the cold doors of the emergency ward, the sterile air heavy with silence. Every step that passed inside, the hurried shuffle of doctors, the metallic clink of instruments, echoed like thunder in her chest. Her palms still bore dust from the fallen house, but now they trembled against her knees, useless, unable to hold on to the man slipping away within. She pressed her forehead to the cool wall, eyes closed, memories pressing in. She saw again the day she first arrived here with Maya, building shelter out of scraps, brother stepping in when no one else would. His voice replayed, warm and steady. "You and Maya are everything to me." Those words, once gentle, now became a vow she feared might dissolve into absence. Around her, the world continued with indifference. A nurse passed, carrying charts. Someone coughed down the corridor. Life did not pause for grief, and yet for Huyen, every second expanded into eternity. Her lips moved in prayer, not for miracles of grandeur, but for one more chance to hear his laugh, to see him tease her again, to have the simple weight of his presence at her side. The silence of the hospital was both a cage and a confessional, holding her despair in its sterile embrace. Outside the hospital doors, time bent into fragile loops. Huyen sat hunched on the bench, the sterile smell of disinfectant burning her nose, her hands still trembling. The hours stretched, but within each pause the past returned in vivid waves. She remembered the rainy night when the roof leaked, brother clambering up, nearly falling until she pulled him down. She remembered the hospital bed from years before, the way he had whispered, "Don't be afraid. I will not leave you and Maya." Those words carried her now. In the waiting silence, she replayed his laughter when Bibi chased chickens across the yard, his hands steady as he carried beams too heavy for two. She recalled the moment he bent low, pulling a splinter from her hand, then offering water as if it were medicine for both body and heart. How small those gestures seemed at the time, yet how monumental they felt now, teetering on the edge of loss. Mom's voice stirred her from reverie, murmurs about boiling taro, about having something warm for when helpers arrived. Even in crisis, life clung to ritual. Food to share, chores to complete, soil to turn. Mr. Hughes' voice buzzed on the phone, his concern sincere, promising to come if needed. Their presence reminded her that kindness did not end at the hospital wall. Yet it was brother's voice, echoing like a refrain, that held her steady. "You and Maya are everything to me." She clutched those words like prayer beads, whispering thanks for the man who had made the ordinary sacred. In fear, gratitude deepened, teaching her that love is most visible in the quiet acts we often overlook. When dawn returned the next day, Huyen stood in the garden again, the soil damp beneath her bare feet. The old house loomed half-fallen, its timbers leaning like weary shoulders. Every corner carried the weight of memory, yet every plank demanded to be repurposed. She held the hammer, but hesitation slowed her hand. Was she dismantling a home, or clearing space for life to continue? Brother's absence pressed against her ribs, his voice still echoing from hospital walls, his words woven into the beams she touched. "You and Maya are everything to me." She heard it in the creak of the rafters, saw it in the shadows where sunlight pierced broken boards. The question lingered. Should she cling to the remnants or begin again? Mom's figure moved quietly at the edge of the garden, gathering taro leaves. Bibi chased chickens between scattered debris, laughter cutting through the stillness. Maya tugged at her sleeve, proud of the pencils and notebooks she now carried, reminders of a future still unfolding. Even amidst loss, life pushed stubbornly forward. Huyen lifted a slat softened by age. "It can be used for a fence," she whispered, half to herself. Brother had said the same words before. She stacked it with care, deciding each piece would live on in another form. Mulch to feed the cucumbers, shade for the chickens, a floor for the coop. Renewal stitched itself into her grief. The choice was no longer about wood or soil. It was about whether to let sorrow freeze her heart. With trembling steadiness, she chose motion. Each salvaged board became both farewell and promise, her silent vow to carry him, to carry them all forward. The afternoon folded light into the hollows where the roof had been. Huyen moved among stacks of reclaimed wood, each plank a map of days lived. Ladder notches, nail stains, the pale curve where rain once ran. She touched a board brother had set aside for the coop's floor and felt the memory of his hands, calloused, sure. Maya laughed by the taro patch, chasing a ribbon of sunlight, while Bibi watched the chickens with solemn little authority. Mom carried a basket of boiled taro, offering it as ordinary barter for later help. Even this small ritual felt sacred. The absent roof opened the sky, a new horizon where weather and memory met. Huyen stood at the edge of the remains and exhaled, letting grief unfurl. She thought of the hospital corridor, of sterile doors, and the slender hope that clung like moss to damp walls. Brother, the man who had steadied their days, lay between machines and prayer. The outcome remained unresolved, a sentence left hanging. She set a plank down and pressed her palm to it, as if passing warmth into wood. Then she spoke quietly, not to any single person, but to the work itself. She would rebuild, not to remake the old house in its former shape, but to honor what had been by giving it new purpose. Each salvaged board would become fence or coop floor, mulch for the garden, a small promise of continuity. In that decision, sorrow softened into resolve. The lesson that had always whispered through small acts, that loving means making room, settled like seed in soil, ready to take root.
Huyền chào khán giả cùng gia đình tháo dỡ ngôi nhà cũ để làm chuồng gà tận dụng gỗ lau và chăm sóc me công việc hơi dại khai ớt một gậy dột vẫn đang ở viện, nhưng lúc này cũng khó. Niềm an ủi trong nước đào cột nhẹ nhất, kết cấu bị mục, phần mái sạch bất ngờ, roder người đàn ông tốt bụng ngã bị thương nặng. Ban đầu có tiếng cười và trêu đùa, nhưng sự cố nhanh chóng chuyển sang hỗn loạn. Roder được dìu ra rồi đưa vào phòng cấp cứu, trong khi Hiền